These ancient castles have stood for hundreds of years, and now they're silent, weathered, and empty. Once symbols of power, they've been reclaimed by nature and are now abandoned. Join me for today's video. We're going to take a look at 20 abandoned ancient castles. Starting with number 20, Chateau Drevacur, France. In the countryside of Normandy, the Chateau de Drevacur is one of France's oldest surviving medieval castles, and one that has long stood without any permanent inhabitants. The castle dates back to the 11th century. It offers a remarkably complete example of early Norman defensive architecture, and despite its historical value, it was abandoned as a residence centuries ago. The name Drevacur translates roughly to broken heart, though in this case it's likely referred to a hard rocky ground rather than romantic sorrow. The first known structures on the site were built by the Norman lords before the conquest of England in 1066. The castle began as a motte and bailey fortress surrounded by a wooden palisade and then later rebuilt by stone. By the 13th century, it had developed into a compact stronghold, complete with a moat, a drawbridge, a fortified gatehouse, and timber-framed manor. Its owners, the Drevacur family, eventually lost the estate during the Hundred Years' War when English troops occupied Normandy. Though the fortress wasn't entirely destroyed, it did suffer repeated damage. Today, it survives remarkably intact. It's an example of Norman military architecture. The moat still outlines the defensive perimeter, and archaeological studies have confirmed the site's authenticity and multi-period construction phases. After centuries of neglect, finally restoration efforts began in the 20th century. The restoration has preserved the structure, but avoided modernizing it for habitation, maintaining its status as an abandoned fortress rather than a refurbished home. It escaped the destruction that befell many Norman castles during revolutions and wars simply because it lay forgotten among the farmlands. Even now, when the fog settles in, the castle stands almost as it did 800 years ago, empty, quiet, and enduring. Number 19, Tada Castle in Scotland. Overlooking the North Sea, Tada Castle is one of Scotland's most dramatic ruins. It sits on a rocky peninsula that's connected to the mainland by a narrow strip. Though it had stood for over 1,000 years and once hosted kings, it's been abandoned since the 18th century, left to the wind and sea spray. Its recorded history begins in the early Middle Ages when a Pictish fort occupied the headland. By the 9th century, it was already known as a place of strategic importance, and in the 14th century, William Keith, Great Marshal of Scotland, built the stone castle that is there today. It sheltered King Charles II in 1650, and most famously was the hiding place of the Scottish crown jewels, the honours of Scotland, during Oliver Cromwell's invasion. When the Cromwell forces besieged the fortress, the Loyalists smuggled the jewels out and hid them in a nearby church, saving them from capture. By the 18th century, Tada had lost its strategic purpose, and the Keith family moved to more comfortable estates inland, and the fortress began to decay. Its roof collapsed, stairways eroded, and centuries of storms stripped the walls. Today, it's one of Scotland's most visited historic sites. Though its structures are occasionally classified as ruins, visitors can explore the Great Hall, the chapel, and the towers, all perched above crashing waves. Tada's isolation, once its greatest advantage, ensured its desertion. Standing alone against the sea, the empty halls and weathered stone peaks of the long transition from medieval stronghold to historical monument, it's a castle abandoned not by destruction, but by the quiet passing of history itself. Number 18, Hohenben Castle in Germany. Overlooking the spa town of Baden-Baden in southwestern Germany are the ruins of Hohenben Castle. It's often referred to simply as the Old Castle. It was built in the 11th century by the Margraves of Baden, and this once dominated the northern Black Forest and served as the ancestral seat of the region's most powerful nobles. Construction of it began around 1100 under Hermann II, Margrave of Baden, and like many early medieval castles, it began as a compact hilltop fortress. Over the following 3 centuries, it was expanded multiple times to include new towers, courtyards, and living quarters. By the 14th century, though, Hohenbaden has become a sprawling residence with views stretching out across the valley into modern-day France. However, as the Margraves' power and ambition grew, so did their need for a more comfortable and accessible home. In the 15th century, they built a new residence, New Castle, down in the valley closer to the town. But the castle's final decline came in 1599 when a fire, likely caused by lightning, swept through the complex and destroyed the timber roofs and interiors. Despite this though, the stonework remains remarkably well preserved, especially the main keep and outer walls. In the 19th and 20th centuries, local historians and preservationists had stabilized the ruins to prevent any further collapse, but no attempt was made to restore it to its original form. Instead, it was maintained as an open-air monument to medieval Baden. By day, it's a peaceful ruin, but by night, surrounded by the mist and moonlight, it shows a medieval world long vanished, the empty halls still holding the shape of power and history. Number 17. Himiji Castle, Japan. Himiji Castle in Japan is one of the most beautiful and best preserved castles in the world. Within the sprawling grounds, though, is a section that stands abandoned, the Nishi-no-Maru residence, known as the West Bailey. This area, once home to the women of the samurai elite and attendants of the castle's ruling family, has been left uninhabited for more than 150 years. Built during Japan's feudal era, Himiji Castle was completed in its current form around 1609 under Lord Ikeda Terumasa. The Nishi-no-Maru compound, located on the castle's western side, was constructed shortly afterwards as a fortified residential quarter for Princess Sen, a member of the Tokugawa clan who married into the Ikeda family. After the fall of Japan's feudal system in the late 19th century, the castle lost its political function. The samurai retainers who once served the domain were disbanded, and their families dispersed. The Nishi-no-Maru, designed for private domestic life within a military fortress, was never repurposed. By the early 1900s, it stood empty, its wooden structures aging quietly. While the central keep and main defenses of Himiji have been carefully maintained and restored as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Nishi-no-Maru has not yet been modernized or permanently reoccupied. Portions have been reinforced for safety, but the residence remains largely in its historical state. Japan's approach to heritage often favors maintaining authenticity over reconstruction, so the residence has been left as it stands, weathered but intact. It looks like a place where time seems to have stopped, a shadow of feudal life that was preserved within the walls of one of the world's greatest castles. Number 16. Shpish Castle, Slovakia. In the hills of eastern Slovakia, Shpish Castle, or Shpish Hrad, is one of the largest castle ruins in Central Europe, and one of the most spectacular abandoned medieval fortresses still standing. Sitting on a limestone hill near the town of Špišské Pohrady, the castle dates back to the early 12th century, and once served as a major political and religious center for the Kingdom of Hungary. Today, it stands empty, the sprawling stone walls and towers overlooking the valleys below. The first fortifications on this site appeared around the year 1100, built to secure the kingdom's northern border. Over the next few centuries, it expanded with Romanesque and Gothic additions, including a grand hall, a chapel, and defensive towers. By the 15th century, it had become one of the largest complexes in Europe, covering more than 5 acres, nearly the size of 7 football fields. In its prime, it was home to the Špiš noble family, and later the powerful Zápolia dynasty. It served as both a fortress and an administrative center. However, by the 18th century, its role had faded, and a devastating fire in 1780 left much of it in ruins. Excavations in the 20th century revealed extensive remains of medieval life, from weapons and pottery to religious artifacts that now fill local museums. Restoration work in the late 1900s did stabilize the structures and preserve them as open ruins rather than reconstructing them. Despite its global recognition, Špiš remains uninhabited. It's a monument to changing times. Standing on its ramparts, you can see the miles of farmland and small villages. Yet inside the walls, the air feels still, as if the centuries since its abandonment have just passed in quiet, uninterrupted decay. Number 15. Chateau Dur Roafixad, France. Not far from Montségur, another medieval fortress rises above the French Pyrenees, the Chateau Dur Roafixad. Like its more famous neighbor, it was part of a defensive stronghold network that once guarded the region. Today, only fragments of walls and foundations remain, and they're an example of nearly a millennium of history that was shaped by conflict, faith, and isolation. Its origins date back to the 11th century, when it was built to defend the county of Foix against the invasions from the north. And during the 13th century, Roafixad became associated with the Cathar movement, though not as directly as Montségur. Historical documents confirm that the fortress offered shelter to refugees and sympathizers during the Albicinian Crusade. Like other castles in the region, it was besieged, captured, and eventually brought under royal control. Today, the ruin is accessible by a steep footpath from the nearby village, and the surviving sections include the outer walls, the gate, and a few rooms carved directly into the rock. Surveys have revealed evidence of earlier wooden structures beneath the stone, which does suggest that the site did evolve over the centuries. But the location is awesome. A narrow ridge that rises above the valleys, it's shrouded in mist, and visitors who make the climb find themselves surrounded by silence and panoramic views. As peace settled across the French frontier and firearms rendered mountain fortresses obsolete, Roafixad simply slipped into disuse. Centuries later, it's there, blending into the rock itself, a monument to the age when stone walls and faith once held the power to shape nations. Number 14. Berg Elt, Germany. In a forested valley above the Moselle River is Berg Elt, one of Germany's best-preserved medieval castles. While the lower parts of the castle are privately owned and maintained by the descendants of the Elt's family, the upper fortifications, older and less accessible, were deserted centuries ago. The first parts of Berg Elt were constructed around 1150 when the Elt's family built a small Romanesque tower on a rocky outcrop above the Elschbach stream. Over the centuries, the site expanded into a complex of multiple residences owned by different families. This arrangement was unique in medieval Germany, essentially a shared fortress village occupied by several noble houses at once. Unlike many Rhineland fortresses, Berg Elt was never conquered or severely damaged, but as the centuries progressed, parts of it became impractical to maintain. The older, upper fortifications, especially those built during the 13th and 14th centuries, were gradually abandoned when newer, more comfortable quarters were constructed. By the 1700s, vegetation had overtaken the walls and wooden floors and roofs had collapsed, but restoration efforts in the 19th and 20th focused on inhabited wings, not the abandoned sections. Historians believe that preserving the ruins in their natural state provides valuable insight into the medieval construction methods. And today, it is open to the public, but the deserted upper wards, crumbling stairways, ruined turrets, and roofless chambers are off limits. Aerial photography does show the clear contrast between the maintained sections and the ghostly remnants that still cling to the cliffs. The upper fortifications are a lost fragment of medieval life, hidden above one of Europe's most photographed castles, where ivy and time have just reclaimed the stones that once guarded generations of lords. Number 13. Krasna Horca Castle in Slovakia. Alright, we're back in Slovakia. Perched on a lone hill, Krasna Horca Castle was once one of the most formidable strongholds in the Carpathians. It was founded in the 14th century by the Mariasi family, and it evolved from a simple Gothic keep into a Renaissance and later Baroque fortress. But after centuries of war, fire, and neglect, it now stands mostly deserted. The original fortress was built around 1320 to protect the trade routes between Transylvania and the Hungarian plains, and over time it became a residence of aristocratic families. A catastrophic fire in 2012 caused the castle's near-total abandonment. Flames were ignited by a grass burn on the slopes below, and it spread rapidly to the roofs and upper rooms. The fire destroyed much of the interior, including priceless artifacts and the distinctive wooden structures that had survived for hundreds of years. Since then, the castle has remained closed to visitors, awaiting restoration. Before the fire, it served as a museum, displaying weapons, manuscripts, and the preserved mummified remains of Count Georgi Andrassy and his wife, a macabre but authentic exhibit. After 2012, conservation teams salvaged what they could, but large sections of the castle remain inaccessible. From the valley below, it still looks imposing, but up close, soot-blackened stones, boarded windows, and collapsed timber roofs tell a different story. It's a living ruin, awaiting revival, but still, in essence, abandoned. Its long history preserved not through restoration, but through the quiet endurance of the scorched walls. Number 12. Chateau de Fuer, France. On a rocky spur above the Nanson River, the Chateau de Fuer is one of France's largest medieval fortresses, an immense walled complex that once guarded the frontier between Brittany and Normandy. The first fortifications here were built in the 11th century by the House of Amboise. The wooden structure was destroyed during conflict with the French crown, and a new massive stone castle rose in the 12th century. Under the Barons of Fougères, who built 3 defensive enclosures separated by moats and towers. Fougères became a key site during the long wars between the Duchy of Brittany and France. The castle changed hands multiple times, besieged by English and French forces alike, and after the final annexation of Brittany into France in the 16th century, its military importance declined sharply. It was briefly used as a garrison, then a prison, before being completely abandoned as a residence by the late 1600s. Major restorations in the 20th century saved the core structure, but large sections of the outer ramparts, towers, and inner halls remain unreconstructed. These areas, roofless, overgrown, and open to the elements, are the genuine remnants of the abandoned fortress. Today, you can walk through the enormous courtyards and climb the towers, but the castle remains largely empty. The moat, still partially flooded, surrounds the complex that feels more like an ancient ghost of power than a restored monument. It endures, not as a museum piece or a polished tourist site, but as a monumental ruin. It's one of the last places in France where a visitor can stand amid vast, authentic medieval walls and imagine a world that's been gone for 500 years. Number 11. Pyama Castle, Slovenia. Pyama Castle is one of the most extraordinary fortresses and one of the strangest examples of partial abandonment. It's located near the town of Postojna in southwestern Slovenia. This 13th century castle is literally fused with the mouth of a huge cave system, using the natural rock as part of its structure. The original castle was constructed around 1200 and later expanded by a noble family. Its most famous resident was the 15th century knight Erasm Luger, often romanticized as a Slovenian Robin Hood. During his defiance of the Habsburg Emperor, Erasm used the castle's hidden cave tunnels to smuggle supplies and evade sieges. After Erasm's death in 1484, Pyama fell under Habsburg control and was rebuilt in the 16th century. The structure today is blending Gothic, Renaissance, and natural caves into one seamless whole. The rooms inside the cliff, dark, damp, and echoing, were abandoned for centuries as living quarters moved to the brighter outer wings. Modern exploration of the cave sections began in the 19th century, and they revealed several kilometers of tunnels and underground halls that had not been entered since the castle's medieval days. Today, scientists use these caves to study geology and bat populations, but large portions remain off-limits. Unlike many castles that just fell into ruin through neglect, Pyama was simply outgrown by time. Modern comfort and safety could never be reconciled with the environment of the interior, and so its deepest chambers remain as they were 500 years ago, empty and untouched. Number 10. Urkart Castle, Scotland. Overlooking Loch Ness in the Scottish Highlands, Urkart Castle is both iconic and desolate. It's a ruin that once guarded one of the most strategic routes through the Great Glen. Though now one of Scotland's most visited heritage sites, the castle itself has been abandoned since the late 17th century. The crumbling walls and collapsed towers are symbols of centuries of conflict. The history stretches back to the 13th century when the first stone fortifications were built under the rule of Alexander II of Scotland. Urkart quickly became a prize in the constant wars between Scottish clans and English forces. It changed hands repeatedly during the Wars of Scottish Independence and was occupied at various times by both sides. In the following centuries, it played a major role in regional power struggles between the MacDonald lords of the Isles and the Scottish Crown, and by the 16th century it was a formidable stronghold with a great tower house, gatehouse, and extensive curtain walls surrounding the headland. In 1692, government troops stationed there to control the Highlands blew up parts of the castle during their withdrawal to prevent Jacobite rebels from using it, and from that moment, Urkart was never reoccupied. Excavations have unearthed some medieval pottery, weapons, and household tools, but no evidence suggests of any permanent habitation after the late 1600s. By the time of its final destruction, the age of castles was ending. Artillery had rendered these kind of fortifications obsolete, and military control shifted to forts and barracks. Today, the castle's setting on a promontory overlooking Loch Ness adds to its atmosphere. Although well maintained as a heritage site, it's empty. It's a monument to the passage of feudal power and the enduring presence of Scotland's untamed landscape. Number 9. Chateau de Maragur, France. On a limestone peak in the French Pyrenees are the ruins of Chateau de Maragur, one of the most famous and symbolic abandoned castles in Europe. Sitting about 1,200 meters above sea level, the fortress commands amazing views of southern France, and it's a somber relic of the 13th century crusade. Its story is deeply tied to the Cathars, a Christian sect declared heretical by the Catholic Church who made Montségur their final refuge. The original castle was built in the early 13th century, though evidence suggests the hilltop, known as Pog, had been fortified since prehistoric times. Montségur was reconstructed around 1204 to serve as a stronghold for a community of Cathars, and from this remote perch they resisted Crusader armies for decades. In 1243, King Louis IX's forces laid siege to the fortress. The defenders, around 200 soldiers and civilians, held out for 10 months before surrendering in March of 1244. When they refused to renounce their beliefs, more than 200 were burned alive at the base of the mountain. This event marked the end of organized Cathar resistance and cemented Montségur's reputation as a place of tragedy and martyrdom. Accessing Montségur still requires a steep climb along a winding trail that goes up more than 400 meters from the valley floor. There are no nearby settlements, and the only sounds are wind and mountain birds. Its abandonment wasn't due to mystery or curse, but to shifting political realities. Yet when you're standing on top of its windswept summit today, surrounded by stone ruins and endless sky, it's easy to see why this lonely castle continues to evoke reverence and the quiet weight of history. Number 8. Castello Duro Cascalenia, Italy. The Castello Dur Cascalenia looks as though it grew straight out of the mountain itself. It was built during the 11th century as a Lombard watchtower. This fortress expanded over time into a small but imposing castle, overlooking the valley of Rio Secco below. Today, it's uninhabited, a striking, weathered ruin that dominates the quiet village at its base. During the Middle Ages, the border between the Lombard Duchy of the Benevento and the Byzantine territories shifted repeatedly through this region. The fortress allowed its occupants to monitor enemy movement across the surrounding valleys. Later, under Norman control, it was enlarged with stone ramparts, a central tower, and a drawbridge linking it to the ridge. Historical documents mention the fortress as early as the 12th century, but by the 17th century, its military role had just vanished. Local tradition claims that the castle's last resident, a baron in the 1600s, was killed after imposing a cruel decree on his subjects. Whether this tale is true or not remains uncertain. There's no surviving record of the event, but it does coincide with periods when the fortress was permanently abandoned. The remaining structures, a tower, chapel, and main courtyard, were stabilized in the 20th century. Earthquakes and erosion had caused parts of the outer walls and stairways to collapse. Visitors, though, can now climb the narrow stairs, still carved into the cliff, to reach the battlements where the view stretches across miles of forested hills. Studies of the site have uncovered medieval pottery, coins, and remnants of frescoes, confirming the continuous use from roughly the 1100s through the 1600s. Yet the upper levels remain roofless as vegetation grows from the cracks in the stones. The structure that stands today, bare, exposed, and silent, is much as it was when the last occupants left. By night, it's illuminated only by scattered village lights below. The castle seems to hover over the valley like a fossil of medieval power. Moving on to number 7, Hohenben Castle in Austria. The Hohenben Castle has guarded the Austrian Alps for more than 900 years. It was built in the late 11th century by the archbishops of Salzburg. It was one of a trio of fortresses, along with the Hohensalzburg and the Friesack, constructed to control trade and defend the province from invading forces. While the lower courtyards and towers have been restored as a museum, the upper bastions and mountainside outworks remain abandoned. Its origins trace back to about 1075 during a period of civil unrest known as the Investiture Controversy. The bishops of Salzburg sought to strengthen their hold on the region, erecting Hohenben on a strategic spur above the valley. Over the centuries, the fortress expanded into a huge complex of bastions, towers, and living quarters. In later centuries, its use shifted from a garrison to a hunting lodge and even a state prison. Prisoners of noble rank were confined within the walls, including high-profile political detainees. However, by the late 18th century, it lost its military relevance. Its upper bastions, high defensive terraces accessible only by steep mountain paths, were abandoned first, followed by the rest of the fortress. Although the castle was partially restored in the 20th century for tourism, the upper levels remain in disuse. The sections exposed to the snow and alpine storms are dangerous to enter. Conservationists have stabilized the core structure but deliberately left the upper ruins untouched. Records confirm that no one has lived permanently in Hohenben since the early 1800s, and its fortifications still bear the marks of cannon fire and later earthquakes. And seen from the valley, it just looks majestic and whole, but its uninhabited upper tier tells a quieter story. the slow retreat of human presence from the mountains. Today, as wind and snow seep through the empty towers, the fortress stands as a half-living monument, part museum, part ruin, and wholly abandoned. Number 6. Chateau Gaillard, France. Above the Seine River, the ruins of Chateau Gaillard are among the most striking. They're built between 1196 and 1198 by King Richard I of England, better known as Richard the Lionheart. This castle was an ambitious feat of engineering for its time. Although it stood only a few centuries before being abandoned, its influence on medieval military design was pretty big. Richard personally oversaw the work, employing a new concentric defensive design with multiple layers of walls, rounded towers to deflect projectiles, and deep moats cut directly into the limestone. The king famously described it as one of the most beautiful castles in the world, confident that it could resist any siege. That confidence was tested almost immediately. In 1204, just 5 years after Richard's death, King Philip II of France besieged the fortress. After a prolonged and brutal campaign, the French forces breached the outer defenses and captured the castle, ending the English rule in Normandy. Despite repairs and later modifications, the fortress never regained its original strength. By the 16th century, advances in artillery had rendered the thick walls obsolete. By 1603, it was officially decommissioned and ordered dismantled by royal decree to prevent it from being used by rebels or foreign armies. Archaeological work in the 19th and 20th century stabilized some key sections which allowed visitors to safely explore it, but no restoration has ever attempted to rebuild it. From the top of the cliff, the view of the Seine winding through the valley below still conveys the genius of its placement. Yet even in ruin, it retains the boldness that defined Richard's reign. Exposed to the wind and sun, it's one of the purest examples of medieval ambition brought to life, and then left to fade, untouched, above the river it once ruled. Number 5. Tada Castle, Japan. In Japan's Hyogo Prefecture, the ruins of Tada Castle sit on a mountain top, earning the nickname the Castle in the Sky. It's located near the town of Asago. It was built in the 15th century during Japan's turbulent Sengoku, or Warring States period. For more than 400 years, it stood uninhabited, abandoned after just a few decades of use. It was constructed around 1441 by Yamana Sozen, a powerful regional lord. Its purpose was to control a key mountain pass between Tajima and Harima provinces. It was built entirely of stone walls without a central keep. After a series of wars and shifting alliances, the castle came under the control of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Japan's great unifier, who stationed one of his retainers there in the late 1500s. But by 1600, after the decisive Battle of Sekigahara established the Tokugawa shogunate, Takeda lost its military importance. In 1600, the garrison was withdrawn, and within a few years the castle was officially abandoned. Unlike many Japanese castles later that were rebuilt in wood or plaster, Takeda was left to decay. The wooden structure disintegrated over the centuries, leaving only the massive stone ramparts that still trace the outline of the fortress. Today, it's protected as a National Historic Site, and only the foundations remain. Early morning visitors often see the mountaintop surrounded by a sea of mist, creating the illusion of an island fortress floating in the clouds. Once warfare moved to firearms and centralized control, remote mountain fortresses like this one were no longer practical. What remains is just a skeletal masterpiece of stone and silence. Number 4. Chillon Castle, Switzerland. Chillon Castle is one of Europe's most photographed medieval landmarks. It rises directly from the rocky shore of Lake Geneva near Montreux in Switzerland. Most visitors today see the perfectly preserved lower halls and courtyards once home to the Counts of Savoy, but few realize the upper fortress, a series of towers and chambers, has been completely abandoned for centuries. While the lower castle has been restored and refinished, the upper bastions are silent and empty. The first recorded mention of Chillon dates back to 1150, when it served as a toll station that controlled the narrow trade route between Italy and northern Europe. Built on a small island of limestone connected to the shore by a bridge, its location made it nearly impossible to attack by land or water. At its height, it functioned both as a fortress and a lakeside palace. The vaulted cellars stored weapons and supplies, while the upper halls housed nobility and their attendants. The castle did also serve as a prison, most famously during the early 16th century, when Francois Bonnevar, and a Genevan monk and political prisoner, was confined in the dungeon for 6 years. His story later inspired Lord Byron's poem The Prisoner of Chillon, which immortalized the fortress in European literature. By the 18th century, however, the political map of the region had changed. The Savoy rulers lost influence, and Chillon fell under Bernese, then Vaudois, control. Its military importance faded, so did its maintenance. The upper levels, accessible only by narrow spiral staircases and wooden walkways, were gradually abandoned. Today, the upper ruins remain closed to the public. They can be glimpsed from the lake or seen in aerial images, a collection of fragmented walls and half-collapsed watchtowers. But standing there above the busy courtyards and guided tours below, one finds silence, the sound of waves echoing faintly up the stairwells, but no human voices fill the space. Its lower halls may thrive as a museum, but its abandoned upper reaches endure as a genuine medieval ruin, untouched since the days when the Counts of Savoy last looked down across Lake Geneva. Number 3. Alamut Castle in Iran. Within Iran's Alborz Mountains are the remains of Alamut Castle, one of the most significant yet long-abandoned fortresses in the Islamic world. It's known as the mountain stronghold of the Nizari Ismailis, often referred to by outsiders as the Assassins. Alamut once served as the center of a powerful state that defied both the Seljuk Empire and the Mongol invasions. Today, its ruins cling to a ridge nearly 2,100 meters above sea level. It was originally constructed around the 9th century, likely as a local defensive post, but it rose to prominence in 1090, when Hassan Isaba, leader of the Nizari Ismaili sect, seized it with bloodshed. From this mountain fortress, Hassan established a network of fortified settlements across northern Persia, forming an autonomous Ismaili state that lasted for more than 160 years. For decades, Alamut withstood repeated attacks. The surrounding mountains, which were steep and barren, made it nearly unapproachable. However, in 1256, a Mongol general launched a campaign to destroy the strongholds, and after a prolonged siege, the defenders of Alamut surrendered on the promise of safety. But the Mongols razed the fortress, burned its famed library, and executed its scholars. Excavations by archaeologists in the late 20th and early 21st centuries have uncovered foundations of residential quarters and a central citadel, yet the site remains largely untouched beyond stabilization. There are no reconstructions or modern structures intruding on its isolation. There are no surviving inscriptions either, no signs of habitation, and few reliable historical plans of the layout. Much of what we know comes from chroniclers who describe the Mongol conquest, and later scholars who piece together its role as a citadel and sanctuary. Even so, archaeologists caution that large portions of the fortress, particularly the lower terraces, remain unexcavated beneath layers of debris. In every sense, Alamut is an abandoned castle, not merely deserted, but emptied of an entire civilization that once flourished here. The Ismaili scholars and soldiers who live there are long gone, yet their legacy stands in quiet endurance of the mountain. Standing on top of the ridge, surrounded by endless stone and sky, one will feel Alamut was never truly destroyed. It was simply left to vanish in the solitude it always sought. Number 2. Bran Castle in Transylvania. On a hill near the Carpathian Mountains, Bran Castle is one of Romania's most famous fortresses. Above a narrow mountain pass that connects Transylvania and Wallachia, it's long captivated the imagination of travelers, and although it's often linked to the legend of Dracula, the true story of Bran is far more complex. The construction of it began in 1377, after Hungarian King Louis I of Anjou granted the Saxon settlers permission to build a stone fortress. The site was chosen for its natural defensibility. It was built using local stone and labor from nearby villages, and it quickly became a crucial checkpoint for trade and a deterrent to raiding armies. Its irregular shape followed the contours of the cliff, producing a series of terraces, towers, and staircases. And by the 15th century, Bran was both a military stronghold and a royal residence. In 1448, the castle came under the administration of Wallachian Prince Vlad III, known as Vlad Tepes, or the Impaler, who used it briefly during his campaigns against the Ottoman forces. This fleeting historical link later inspired its association with Bram Stoker's fictional Count Dracula. Even though Stoker never visited Romania and described a castle that bears little resemblance to Bran, the real fortress served a more mundane purpose: customs enforcement and regional defense. By the 18th century, as the Ottoman threat waned, more modern military tactics made mountain fortresses obsolete, Bran's importance declined. It gradually fell into disuse, and by the mid-1800s, large portions of the castle were abandoned. After the abolition of the Romanian monarchy in 1947, Bran Castle was seized by the state and used intermittently as a museum, though for decades much of it stood uninhabited. And these areas were filled with centuries of dust and still bear traces of the original medieval plaster, soot from the torches, and 15th century stonework that's never fully been restored. Archaeological surveys in the 1990s uncovered artifacts dating to the castle's earliest years, yet today significant portions of the fortress remain unstudied. Their contents are locked away behind walls or sealed doors. Preservation efforts have focused on maintaining the public galleries, not reopening the unstable wings higher up in the cliff. The wind whistles through the arrow slits, and loose shutters creak in the mountain air. It is these forgotten spaces, not the myths of vampires, that give Bran its true haunted presence. Number 1. Krakto Chevier, Syria. In the mountains of western Syria is an important castle, Krakto Chevier. It's once a formidable crusader stronghold. It was the headquarters of the Knights Hospitaller and a key military fortress during the 12th and 13th centuries. The fortress occupies a ridge overlooking the Homs Gap, a corridor connecting the Mediterranean coast with the Syrian interior. The site's earliest fortifications date back to around 1031, when it was a Kurdish stronghold known as Hisan Akrad, the Castle of the Kurds. After the First Crusade, it was captured by Raymond IV of Toulouse in 1099 and soon transferred to the Knights Hospitaller, who transformed it into an advanced military fortress. Between 1142 and 1271, the Hospitallers rebuilt it on an unprecedented scale. The outer curtain wall measured up to 30 meters thick in some places, surrounded by an inner fortress complete with vaulted halls, barracks, storerooms, stables, and a chapel. The castle could house more than 2,000 soldiers and withstand sieges for years, supported by cisterns and granaries that were stocked with food and water. For more than a century, Krakto Chevier symbolized crusader power in the Levant. It survived repeated Muslim assault and served as a base for campaigns into the interior. Yet by the late 13th century, its position had become untenable. The Mamluk Sultan Baybars launched a siege in 1271, which bombarded the walls with catapults and eventually forced its surrender. Though the Hospitallers negotiated safe passage, the fortress was immediately repaired and reused by the Mamluks, who added Arabic inscriptions and converted the chapel into a mosque. Over the following centuries, it gradually fell out of use, and by the 19th century it was largely abandoned, its once grand halls serving as makeshift shelters for herders and travelers. In the early 1900s, French archaeologists conducted surveys and restorations, clearing the debris and stabilizing the walls, and for much of the 20th century the site was a symbol of culture, attracting historians and architects and tourists from around the world. However, the civil war that erupted in Syria in 2011 brought new damage. Shelling and small arms fire scarred sections of the outer ramparts, and parts of the main keep collapsed under artillery impact. But archaeologists continue to study the site using drones and 3D mapping, yet many of its subterranean chambers are still inaccessible. Today, standing on the upper battlements, you can see the weight of history and the fragility of the present. The view stretches across olive groves and distant villages, but within the castle itself there is only stillness, maybe the echo of footsteps that have long vanished. In every sense, Krakto Chevier remains an abandoned stronghold of extraordinary power. It is a masterpiece of medieval fortification that's outlived the empires and armies that once fought to possess it.